One hot, dry afternoon, when the sun hung high and the village lay quiet under its heavy glare, a rumble echoed up the road. The sound grew louder, and soon a rusty, dusty van came into view, wobbling along the narrow path. It was a rare sight, few vehicles ever ventured this far, and all who saw it stared with a mix of wonder and unease. I was with Adesewa and the other girls by the Iroko tree, checking over her Egungun costume. When we heard the van, Adesewa's eyes flashed, and she looked at me with a nod. Without a word, I pulled the patched-up garment over my head and tied it around my waist, adjusting the shells and feathers that hung from its tattered edges. I slipped the mask over my face, feeling the familiar weight settle over me, the rough wood pressing against my cheeks. My heart thundered with anticipation as I adjusted the layers of cloth and felt the transformation take over. The van stopped just at the edge of the village, and out stepped a man. He was tall, pale-skinned, with a dust-streaked shirt clinging to his back. In one hand, he held a small leather-bound book, and his face wore a look of kindness, even curiosity, as he gazed at the villagers gathering nearby. As the crowd murmured, I stepped forward in my Egungun garb, keeping my movements slow and measured, just as we had practiced. The villagers made way, their eyes widening as I emerged, and a hushed silence fell over them. I took a steady breath, letting the spirit of the Egungun flow through me, feeling its power in every step. The man's eyes widened as he saw me, and he took a step back, his hand clutching the book to his chest. For a moment, he looked at me with something like fear, but then he relaxed, lifting his hands as if to show he meant no harm. "Please," he said in a thick accent, his voice trembling slightly. "I come in peace. I don't wish to harm anyone." The villagers exchanged wary glances, but I held my ground, tilting my head in silence, letting the mask's unblinking eyes bore into him. The shells and leaves clinked and rustled as I shifted my weight, and the man watched with wide, cautious eyes. "I am only here to help," he continued, his voice softer, pleading. "To share knowledge, to bring medicine and learning." He lifted his hand slowly, gesturing to the van, where a few boxes were stacked in the back. "These things, they can improve your village, bring you, what's the word, prosperity." I could feel Adesewa and the other girls watching from the shadows, waiting to see what I would do. A mix of anger and suspicion burned in my chest. We had heard promises like this before, sweet words spoken by those who tore families apart, who claimed they were bringing help while leaving us empty and afraid. I remembered the fear in Adesewa's eyes when she spoke of her mother, the empty hearts of those who had been taken, the heavy silence that had settled over the village since the raids. I took a step closer to the man, lifting my arm slowly so that the feathers and scraps of cloth spread out like wings. He swallowed, his eyes flicking to the mask, his hand still raised in a gesture of peace. "I understand you don't trust me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I am not here to take anyone. My name is Thomas. I'm here to help, to bring education, books, a future." His eyes softened, and he took a cautious step forward, gazing directly into the mask's hollow eyes. I know people like me have done terrible things to you, but I am not one of them." For a moment, I hesitated, his words catching me off guard. The kindness in his voice was different, not like the harsh shouts of those raiders who had come before. He sounded almost sorry. But then, I remembered the others who had come, who had also used soft words, hiding their true intentions. My hands tightened into fists beneath the cloth. I took another step forward, tilting my head and letting out a low, guttural chant, a sound that echoed from the back of my throat, something fierce and otherworldly that we had practiced in secret. The shells and feathers shook and clattered, and the villagers murmured, their eyes wide as they watched. Thomas took a shaky step backward, glancing over his shoulder at the van. "Please," he stammered, his voice faltering. "I only want to help. I will not force anything on you. If you ask me to leave, I will. But I beg you to consider what I can offer. I mean no harm, only a chance for healing, for learning." His words hung in the air, and I felt the eyes of the entire village on me. Beneath the mask, my mind raced. The feeling of power was there, the weight of the Egungun costume wrapping me in the spirits of our ancestors. But there was a sliver of doubt creeping in now, whispering questions I hadn't considered. With a final, slow movement, I lifted my arm, pointing toward the road that led out of Obawa. Thomas looked at me, a sadness flickering in his eyes, but he nodded, understanding. He raised his hands again in a gesture of peace, stepping back slowly toward the van. As he turned, he paused, his voice carrying over his shoulder. I will respect your wishes, but if you ever change your mind, know that my door is open. I only want what's best for you all. He climbed back into the van, and with one last glance, he turned the vehicle around, leaving a trail of dust in his wake as he drove back down the winding path. As I watched him go, I felt a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty settle in my chest. I had protected the village, held my ground, stood as a shield against the outside world, but something about his words lingered, stirring questions I didn't have answers to. When I removed the mask, Adesowa looked at me, her eyes filled with admiration. You were incredible, Obalewa, she whispered. You protected us. I nodded, but inside, my heart felt heavy, as if the weight of the Egungun costume had left something behind. Had he truly meant us no harm? Or was this just another trick, another way to gain our trust before taking even more? As we packed away the Egungun costume that evening, the questions lingered in my mind, shadows that would not fade. And in the quiet of the night, as the village settled into sleep, I found myself wondering if maybe, just maybe, the path to protecting Obawa was more complicated than I had ever realized.